Hi, everyone. Today we'll be doing a takeover episode with Self Lovin Hearts. It's a nonprofit towards self-love advocacy, and we'll be covering this episode on self-love. I'm your host, Yesha, and we have a guest speaker here today. Would like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Musgrove-Ortiz, and I am an associate professional clinical counselor with Mentis here in Napa, California.
Awesome. Okay, so obviously, to start off, we actually did an episode together last year, and I also asked you some questions because I thought that self-love was not really talked about. I feel like in my community, even though I saw that a lot of people were struggling with it, especially youth. So I wanted to know more about your perspective as a therapist. And when dealing with clients who do have issues with self-love, how do you usually, or what do you usually see to be the main sources of those issues or struggles?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's a great question. And I would say it's usually a combination of different things. So one, of course, we're in the age of technology. So social media, comparison is always a culprit of someone getting in the way of someone's self-love. So I would say that plays a role. Someone's past experiences can play a role. So usually if someone has experienced criticism or bullying or even traumatic events, that can cause us to have limiting beliefs about ourselves, which blocks our ability to be kind to ourselves and love ourselves.
I totally agree. For me, actually, I think it was social media. And I think that's what I see to be the biggest cause as well, among young people, even middle schoolers. So what do you usually tell people who struggle with comparison on social media, whether it's through appearance or, oh, their life looks so much better than mine? What kind of advice do you give to those students, and have you seen them kind of benefit from it?
Yeah. Social media, it plays such a huge role for, I feel like everyone, but most definitely middle school students, high school students, the younger generations. We're always connected through social media in some way.
Yeah.
And depending on your algorithm and what you're consuming, what you're watching, it can influence how we view ourselves, how we compare ourselves to one another. And typically when I work with clients who struggle with this, I often ask them what type of media are they consuming. So really working with them on changing the algorithm to help them maybe find different influencers who help them feel good. Or there's a lot of amazing pages on social media that promote mental health awareness and provide coping skills and the things that fill your cup up. So really shaping the algorithm to really serve you instead of putting you down.
Okay, awesome. But outside of social media, I think that is such useful advice though, because again, a lot of youth spend pretty much all of their time on social media. So what could we do outside of that to, I guess, take steps towards loving ourselves more?
Yeah, that is a really great point, because I think even the act of disconnecting from social media and technology is one step.
Yeah.
Because it does play a role in our neurons, and there's a lot of neuroscience behind how social media and our phones influence us and our brain chemistry. So outside of social media, ways to improve our self-love, I would say do something you're really passionate about. Do something that really makes you feel good. I am a really big advocate for getting a skill that you can improve in, because naturally that increases our confidence.
Right.
Also, when we're doing something that we love, we also have fun, and we're able to connect with others in that way too. So I would say that's one way. And then another way, and I know you're familiar with this, is affirmations.
Yes.
Yeah. So practicing affirmations and our self-talk is so important. Language and the language that we use for ourselves, it's something that we don't think about firsthand, but it's so helpful, because the language that we use for ourselves and the words that we tell ourselves have such influence on us. So I would say that would also be beneficial outside of social media.
Yeah, I actually agree, 100%. Because I remember like, I think I talked about this before, like 8th grade for me was like the point where I got like so insecure. Like that was during COVID too. So I was like on social media all the time. But I remember I invested so much time in my hobbies. I've been playing piano for like several years, up to that point too. And even now, and I remember like how much I was able to like really express myself. I always felt like I was putting on some kind of like other person, you know, like I was trying to be someone else that I thought people would like more. But once you do actually invest your time in the things you're passionate about, you get to express yourself for who you are, and you get to love yourself for who you actually are as well. So I love that advice. But I know that our friends may also struggle with these issues. So how would you say, sometimes we have friends that like are struggling with insecurity, and if there's some people that don't really know how to give advice or like start a conversation with them about it, but they know they're going through it. How would you give advice to like start that conversation with that person?
Yeah, and that's a really difficult situation to be in, especially if someone isn't outward about their insecurities. And it's also a very sensitive subject as well, too. And I would say in that situation, of course, being mindful of what we say and how what we do. Typically, I know when people are dealing with insecurities and they're not outward about it, I think it's also noticing the signs of when they are dealing with it and they're not outwardly saying something. So one example would be being mindful of the jokes that we use. I know sometimes people can joke and secretly it really hurts their insecurities, but we don't know because they're not communicating that to us. But I would say to start the conversation, to say, hey, I'm here to talk and to help if you need. I would just say practice being vulnerable with them, probably. I think when we are vulnerable with the people around us, it encourages them to be vulnerable with us.
I also agree with that. I think I talk about this a lot too, but I remember it was my sister that reached out to me, and like she noticed that I wasn't really talking to her about like kind of my struggles with it during the time. And she took the time to actually be vulnerable with me and let me know that, hey, I'm kind of like going through something too. Like she was kind of going through these insecurities, struggle with her identity. And I was like, wait, like I'm going through that too. So it's kind of like that shared, like, I guess, relatability. And it makes it really like, it's like you're able to open up to that person more because you're both being vulnerable together. So I like that you touched on that. But I also wanted to talk about, because especially for seniors, that college decisions came out recently. And I've seen like so many people, like every year whenever college decisions are happening, it's like trending everywhere. And I see like people like post their reactions about it, especially when it comes to rejection. And they come to like doubt themselves, or like, oh, why wasn't I good enough for a certain college? And that can also take a toll on someone's, self-love. And I wanted to know what kind of advice you would give to those people experiencing rejection. I know everyone always hears, rejection is redirection. And sometimes I guess like not everyone wants to hear that either. So I guess how can we still love ourselves despite experiencing rejections?
Yeah. And I know that affirmation is really huge. I even thought about it when you were asking this question in my mind, but that's true. Not everyone wants to hear that. And sometimes it's hard to even think that way when you are receiving that rejection letter.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to internalize it. So internalizing something means taking that event, so specifically rejection in this case, and we base it on our self-worth. So we're internalizing it of what's wrong with me, why didn't they accept me? And it's from that point, it's so easy to go into a internalized spiral of just shame and self-doubt. And like you said, it takes a toll on someone's self-love. So what I would recommend is practice catching that. So oftentimes when it comes to those automatic negative thoughts, we have to really challenge them because they just naturally come up, and that's okay. Yeah. And it's just part of our it just happens. We're human. So the important thing is to recognize that, take a step back and allow yourself to feel whatever's coming up. So I think when it comes to rejection, especially from college and admissions, it's really the practice of letting yourself feel whatever it is you're feeling. If you're feeling disappointed, that's okay. If you're feeling sad, that's okay. But when it comes to internalizing it, practicing taking a step back and doing something nice for yourself, because even though you didn't get admitted to the college, maybe it was the college of your dreams or backup plan or whatever it is, it doesn't feel good, and that's okay. It's okay to feel sad about it, but remembering that it doesn't define you.
Yes, totally. I remember back when I was like experiencing like rejections myself from during college decision season, and I was literally so let down. I remember like, but you know, my mom told me like it's okay like to let it out and cry about it. But that just means, you know, they didn't deserve you. You just have to move on, you know. And I think that helped me a lot because also sometimes, like, it really isn't you. Like, you're not the problem. And I feel like, I agree. Like, sometimes, like, I feel like we always, like, blame ourselves for, like, what didn't we do to get to that college. And just rejection in general. I think failure for a lot of people is kind of, that also takes a toll on, you know, that also creates more insecurities for yourself. Like, you know, why can't I be perfect? And I guess that's another thing that I wanted to go into. I know like so many like of my friends that are so high achieving and they, you know, want to get to these amazing like top colleges and, you know, some that were rejected from them. And they kind of just have this cycle of like, I have to be perfect. I have to succeed at everything. And that was even me at one point. So I guess how do you kind of help people that like break that cycle of perfection and, you know, having people be like, you know what, I'm okay with it.
Yeah. And that's such a big issue and a common thing I see when I see clients and even with myself. I think we definitely live in a society where we tend to base our self-worth on achievements. And that's a dangerous line to walk because we're more than our achievements. And I feel like when it comes to the fear of failure, it's a really complex subject because we really do have to break it down of where did this begin and what evidence do we have against it. Oftentimes, what I encourage people to do when that comes up is to take a moment and think about the opposite. So when we fail a test or if we're maybe not doing so well in school, take a moment to think about, okay, well, when are other times when I have succeeded? And really just practice self-compassion. I think self-compassion goes a long way, especially when we are feeling like we're not succeeding in something. And it's a really complex subject though, and it really takes a toll on our self-worth.
That's true. And as someone who's like also struggled with like perfection, sometimes it can come from like your household. Sometimes it can come from, you know, who you're competing with at school. Some schools have more competitive classes than, you know, other schools, and that can be a factor as well. So I guess it was really helpful to know, you know, just like remembering that, you know, I'm worth so much more than whatever number, GPA, how many A's I have in school, and, you know, all of my academic achievements that I'm more than that. And I see that still as like a super big struggle for sure. And that could also lead into like academic burnout, which I know we talked about in another episode, but even that, you know, takes a toll on us. And so I also hear like a lot of people that say, you know, that are like against taking breaks when you're doing homework, or, you know, that like self-love in itself like is selfish. Like I remember seeing like a TikTok about it and I was like, oh, that's like kind of crazy. Like, and the comments are agreeing like, oh yeah, like if you're all about self-love, like that's kind of selfish. Like, how would you say to like combat that? Because I definitely disagree, but like, what would you say to like people that believe that?
Yeah, and I disagree too, because I think self-love is important. I think in order for us to function on a day-to-day basis and to hold space for others, be a supportive friend, parent, whoever we are, we do have to provide love for ourselves because it really does shape how our day looks like. It shapes how we talk to ourselves. It shapes so much. So what I would say to combat that is maybe even being curious as to why the other person. So if you are in a conversation with someone who thinks that, my go-to is always being curious of what makes them think that way. So what makes them think it is selfish? Just being curious and trying to see where the disalignment lies. Because I think oftentimes when people think self-love is selfish, they often have a misconception over what self-love actually is. I think sometimes people think it's selfish because they think, oh, well, if I love myself, then I'm only thinking about myself. Or it's, that's all I think about. And it's not that. I think it's just such a misconception of what self-love actually is.
Okay. Yes, I definitely agree. I just thought it was like super weird when I opened the comments and like everyone was agreeing. I was like, guys, no, like self-love is so important. And not even just in youth, but I've always like kind of wondered, have you dealt with like clients that were like older and they've kind of like dealt with these issues, and is it different when you give them advice?
Yeah, no, that is a good question. And I have worked with adults who have these same issues. And I think it's an issue that's along all generations, especially perfectionism. It's heavy in adulthood as well, too.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes people, what we don't realize is even like, so let's say when we leave high school, right? We become an adult, I guess, because we're 18 and we're out in the world. But everything that we've still dealt with in high school, it still follows us unless we have addressed it in some way. Things don't magically kind of disappear.
Yeah.
So this problem definitely lies in adulthood as well, too. And typically with my advice for adults, it looks very similar to when I work with youth, but a little bit different because I feel like adults have a bit of more autonomy over what they can access. I think that's the really big difference, because if I'm working with youth, I have to think, okay, well, they're in a certain household with certain rules. They don't have transportation. Whereas adults, they can go seek out communities that celebrate them instead of bring them down, or they can, they just have more access to things. And I think that's the only difference, though.
Okay. Yeah. Because I always wondered what it looked like. I feel like when I talk to like people in my community about it, they kind of immediately think that, you know, it's kind of just contained around youth, which we do see a lot of, but I definitely don't think that it's just a youth problem. But I was curious for like people that on social media as well who put on like filters and they have all these like makeup products. I know that sometimes that can be like damaging to like youth, for like especially really young people to see. Like I know that my younger cousins who are like, you know, in elementary school have like already started wearing makeup, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you look older than me. But it can also be like the other way around. There's also some people who feel like they have to wear makeup to like cover up their natural features. What kind of advice would you give to those people for like helping them embrace like their natural features as well?
Yeah, and that's another complex issue that's everywhere, I feel like, especially since filters have become so advanced. I think they've become to the point where you don't even know if they're wearing a filter. But besides a small disclaimer, I think social media now has. But it's still, it skews our perception of what we look like as humans, and kind of dives into societal expectations like beauty standards, and what is real and what is not. And I think that also plays a role in perfectionism in a way, because if we're so used to seeing something on the screen and then in real life we look different because, you know, the AI and filters, it's totally different. We start to then think that we're supposed to look like that 24/7 when that's not reality. So for that, what I recommend is, and again, I think that's more of a delicate process that takes time. And I think this is with self-love in general. This stuff takes time, consistency and practice, because if we are not used to loving ourselves and doing practices that really enhance self-love, it takes time to build that consistency, and it might feel weird at first. But for that, I typically tell clients to, if they notice themselves, you know, maybe feeling the need to wear makeup, small exposure therapy. So what it would look like to go to the grocery store without makeup, or, taking a photo without makeup. So the small ways of exposing yourself, of feeling yourself without makeup, or maybe not as much makeup, and really tearing it down to small baby steps. Because it can feel overwhelming if we feel like we have to look a certain way, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, don't do any of that. It's like, no, like I can't. So it's really just working with the person in baby steps of small exposure, because the more we do something that makes us uncomfortable, the more comfortable we get with it.
That's true. Yeah. And I totally agree. I remember like when I was like freshman, sophomore, I like literally saw all these girls that like had lash extensions on like all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I need to look like that. So I remember wearing like strip lashes like literally every single day. Like my natural eyelashes were dead. And I remember like I was like, this is kind of unhealthy. So like I remember when I stopped for a little bit, and I went out, like I started going to school without my makeup some days, and I was like, wait, I kind of look good, like, so I definitely agree with that. I think when you do it more, you get more comfortable with it, and you get more comfortable with, how you look naturally. And can go the other way too. Like I see girls like on social media that will bash like maybe girls who are like wearing lashes or have extensions, like, you're not pretty without it. Like you're only using it, to look good all the time. But, that's not true either. Even girls like with extensions or whatever, they're also pretty naturally. If they're pretty with it, they're pretty without it as well. So yeah. But I know another thing with insecurity can be seeking validation from others. And I see this a lot too. Like, maybe girls will try to seek male validation or vice versa, because it is, self-love can also be a problem within boys. And I feel like not a lot of people know that either. So I guess in general, like, how do you stop that cycle of just like seeking validation from other people?
Yeah, because that's a real thing. People want to feel good about themselves. I think whether they will admit that or not. So if someone's in a phase of self-loathing, so if they're just, I hate myself, I don't like anything about myself, it's easier to search for that in other people than ourselves sometimes. And I think that's why it's a huge issue of external validation of how can I get as many people as possible to like me, or maybe I'm dating this person because they're giving me attention, but maybe they don't even align with my values and what I want. Yeah. So it's a really tricky subject when that comes up. But when it comes to that, I think it always comes back to practicing self-compassion and really challenging yourself. I think that's the biggest thing. And when I say challenge yourself, I don't mean in a mean way. And I think sometimes it can be mistaken as that. But it's most likely, it's an act of externalizing. So when that voice in your head comes in, it says, I really want this person to like me, or I want to get so many likes on my photo. Really challenge that voice and ask, why are you here right now? What is your purpose? What are you trying to protect me from? Because oftentimes our internal critic is really what it is. It's trying to help us in some way, but it's not actually helpful, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And what we have to do is then replace that inner critic with a more kinder voice of, I am worthy even if I don't have a partner, or I'm worthy if I don't succeed at this. It's just really actively challenging and trying to change that self-talk. But it is hard, I feel like, especially now in the tech world. I feel like when there's dating apps and I think that's always been a thing, even before technology, of external validation, because it's just, again, so much easier to have someone say they like us. But even when that happens, we tend to not feel good about ourselves still. Yeah. So it's like this endless chase.
Yeah, I agree. And that can still be an issue like anywhere too, no matter what age you are. Whether, you're an adult in your workplace or it's youth at school. But I also noticed that I remember when I was starting the Self Lovin Hearts chapter at my high school, and I noticed that it was like a lot of girls that came. And I remember like asking some of my guy friends, I was like, you guys should come too. They're like, yeah, but like self-love is just for girls, you know what I mean? I was like, nah, like, it's also, like it's an issue that's like universal. So I guess like what kind of advice would you give to like boys in general for, I guess, like practicing vulnerability and not being like cringe or like awkward about it, I guess.
Yeah. I've noticed that too when I work with youth and even adults. I think it's just a generational wide thing where, and it comes down to men's mental health and the stigma around men's mental health. And I think advice I would give would be remembering that you're human as well. That's typically when I work with guys, I will tell them, you're human. And as humans, we feel things. It doesn't mean that we're immune to mental health problems. And that ties into self-loathing and not practicing self-love. And I think it's still important for all humans to practice self-love. But typically I try to work with them in reframing that thought of men. There's so much mental health stigma out there. So I really try to help them deconstruct that and help them realize that we're human, we're all human, and we all need to practice self-compassion towards ourselves because it just shapes our world in such a brighter way than if we live a life where we're going through life and we self-loathe and we hate ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. To wrap up, I think an important last piece that I kind of wanted to ask you about is actually what kind of advice you would give to our viewers for, I know a lot of them, especially in our area, come from maybe families with immigrant parents and don't really know how to talk about this stuff, even just mental health in general. But I remember it took me some time to talk to my parents about these struggles that I had. So I guess what advice would you give to our viewers, anyone that's watching this, to, I guess, how to be vulnerable with parents where when they grow up, these struggles were not really normalized?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question because I think that's such an important question and topic to bring up because I think when we practice being vulnerable with our parents, yes, it can feel very scary and intimidating, but the potential of your relationship and the growth that can happen is huge. And I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is remembering that your parents are also people. So, and people are always trying their best. And sometimes they might not have the tools, or maybe they didn't grow up with as much mental health awareness as we have now. So it's sometimes helpful for them to understand your perspective and the information that's now available. And just keep reminding yourself that parents are people, and even if it's scary, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
I agree. I remember when I talked to my parents about it, and it was actually going into high school. And I remember talking about it with my mom at first because I feel like I'm definitely closer to her. And it was so much less scarier. And when I actually brought it up to both of my parents when I was first starting Self Lovin Hearts, they're like, wow, this is really cool. Everything I'm glad that you're putting yourself out there and that, being vulnerable with other people in this way. And, sometimes it's just scarier in our head. And now I'm just glad that I was able to, I guess, be more open with them about it. So I'm glad that you guys also got that advice. But thank you so much for being here. I think this is so useful to know, not just for use, but for everyone who's watching. And I'll definitely keep this in mind. I definitely want to share this stuff at, our next Self Lovin Hearts meeting. But thank you everyone for watching. And just remember that you are loved. And we hope that you enjoyed the Self Lovin Hearts Takeover episode with SHINEcast. Thank you for watching. Bye.